Hi, I'm Jane Hutcheon, and in July 2010 I created 1+1, and up until September 2019 recorded nearly 500 interviews. In this series, I'm bringing together my top 10. They're the conversations which have taken me by surprise or somehow had an impact on me. I hope you enjoyed this interview with actor David Suchet. David Suchet, welcome to 1+1.
Thank you.
Your grandfather was quite a famous photographer,
Yes.
and he encouraged you and your brothers to take photographs.
Yes.
Do you recall the first photo you ever took?
Yes, I do. But it wasn't under his tutelage. The first photograph I ever took was with a Brownie box camera when I was 7.5 years of age, when I was first sent to boarding school. My grandfather gave it to me as a birthday present and said, "See how you get on with this." And I took a picture of my brother because he was at the same school.
Did it come out?
Yes, it did come out. Not very well, but it came out.
Was that an instant fascination for you?
Yes, because mainly I loved the man. My late grandfather was the closest to me of any male in my family, including my father. He was the most extraordinary human being and really influential on my whole life. And the fact that he was a photographer and we got on so well, I wanted to know everything about him, and he taught me photography, with me almost sitting on his knee.
Why did he take photographs?
He took photographs because his father was a photographer. Actually, his father was a photographer. He worked for the police force in the very late 1880s or 1890s. He was a Victorian photographer, and he took photographs of dead bodies. And my grandfather used to go with him, and he learnt photography there. It was a sort of natural thing for him to do.
You said earlier that your grandfather was the closest male figure to you, even closer than your father. Why was that? Was your father a remote man?
My father was a typical Edwardian. He was also a very, very busy and successful gynecologist and obstetrician. And in the day in London in the 50s, and that's when he was really settling into his career, I'm sure everybody will know that to be a gynecologist and obstetrician, you don't lead a 9 to 5. And he was out most of the time. And then we were sent to boarding school at the age of 7. And I didn't come back till I was 18, except for school holidays. And I would see more of my grandfather during that time than I would my own father.
Your father had quite an influential role in the development of penicillin with Sir Alexander Fleming. How did he see his own part in that?
Well, he was a lab technician at the time. He was a very young man. We used to know him in the family as Flem. And he was there. He was the unnamed doctor with Fleming's team, the famous photograph that was actually taken by my grandfather. He was the young doctor in the back there that was never really named, and he was with Flem at that time.
Your father, Jack, he didn't approve of you becoming an actor, did he?
No.
Why not?
Not many fathers do, even today. I meet young boys and girls who come to me and say, I want to be an actor, but my dad doesn't want me to. It's because, mainly, I think, it's an insecure profession. And my father came from an insecure background and didn't want that for me. I think it's as simple as that, really.
And what about your mum? Did she like the fact that you were going into the theatre?
Yeah, she was thrilled to bits because her mum was a music hall artist in the early days, not the early days, about 1912 in the Edwardian Music Hall. And she used to do what we call the Empire Circuit, which was all the big empire theatres around England. And she was a sound dancer and a song and dance girl. And my mum, before she married, and after she did amateur dramatics, but she was a dancer with Evelyn Leigh in the West End and a singer. So I come from very much on that side of the family, my English side, very much from the entertainment industry.
I read that when you were 16, you went around making documentaries about poor people in London.
Yeah.
Did that last a long time, that phase?
Yeah, if I'd have managed to get a job as an independent film camera operator and my dream was to do documentaries. And my first cine camera was an 8mm. And I went round the poor parts of London. I was always very concerned about the poor in London and how they lived. And I did a little documentary. I don't know where it is now. I haven't got a clue. But I loved doing that.
And what was it about the poor that attracted your concern?
I don't know, except that I always felt very sorry and my heart went out to them and I would sit with them. I used to film. I was very young. I was only about 17, 18. But I'd always sit with them and talk to the kids and talk to the parents, and they want to know what I was doing, and I'd show them what I was doing. It was just, I felt very easy with them, and I felt that they were, at that time in London certainly, we were still in very much a class system, they were sort of pushed to the sidelines, and it was after the war, so they were really having a hard time. Now those areas, I have to tell you, are really classy, and you will know them as Notting Hill Gate and Paddington and all around there, but now it's and Kensington, and now it's very, very posh.
Did you ever feel sidelined by the class system?
No, although I've always felt in my life, because I think of my background and I think of my own bloodline, being Russian Jewish on one side and being completely British on the other side, but I've always felt, with all the roles that I've played as well, something of an outsider in my own industry, and yet I'm considered part of the establishment in my own country. And I'm very proud to be a CBE and part of my own culture and part of my own country. I feel very proud to be British, but there's something inside me that feels strangely separate. And I do, as I say, I've played most of my career have been outsiders, including Poirot.
We'll go on to Poirot in a short while, but first of all, I was interested to find out from you, when did you begin to feel like an outsider? Was that an early feeling, or is that something you discovered later on?
I think it probably started at school, because I felt an outsider then, because I was very, very small. I was a prem baby and I was small, and the only way I could get in and be what I call an insider was to really work hard at my sport, which is what I did.
You were with the Royal Shakespeare Company for about, was it 13 years? At what stage did you begin to describe yourself as a character actor?
That's a very good question. When I left drama school in 1969, strangely, having won the Best Drama Prize, playing a character, not being myself, I thought at one point I may have a career as a leading man. That was soon quenched when I discovered that I was suddenly playing 50-year-olds when I was 23 in repertory theatre in England, and my makeup bag was probably larger than the role that I had to play. And I have very rarely, ever since, I think because of my voice and my physique, ever played a leading man. I've always been character actor, and I've always enjoyed being and developing roles that are different from myself, and in so doing, serving my writer. That's what I like to do. I like to serve my writer.
So when you first decided that you were going to go into the theatre, what was the production that made the penny drop?
Well, it wasn't a production. I was in the National Youth Theatre playing in Bartholomew Fair at the Royal Court, and I was 18 years of age. And we'd had a lovely time, and I hadn't decided what I wanted to do with my life at that point at all. And when I picked up my makeup bag, and as I said, it was probably larger than the role I was playing, I thought I'd like to go down to the side of the stage, because it was the end of the run, and watch all the scenery being pulled down. And I'd never watched that. And I went and I stood at the side of the Royal Court stage. And I remember exactly where I was standing. In fact, I've been back there recently before it's been refurbished, and stood on the very same spot. And I watched all the scenery coming down, and I looked at the empty seats in the auditorium, and I looked at the stage, and I remembered that we were all up there performing, playing for an audience that were sitting over there. I thought, this is the most extraordinary atmosphere. This is where I want to spend my life. Had nothing to do with the role, had nothing to do with a performance, had nothing to do with a play. It was to do with theatre.
It's interesting because you talk about the sets and the flats being taken down. Do you have a similar feeling of, I suppose, being dressed down from a character when you finish a performance?
You mean after each night? Yeah, it takes me a long time to come down from a character every night. I tend to be an actor that gets very deeply involved in the character and the performance I'm given. So at the end of every night, I do a very small but quick deprogramming for myself that was actually given to me by a psychologist in London when he said, you can't carry on acting the way you do unless you get rid of your character. And he showed me how to do that.
And why was he concerned for your, presumably your mental health?
Yeah, because I was playing in Timon of Athens at that time, and playing Timon was a great psychological struggle, that role.
The character goes mad, I think.
Yeah, he does. He almost goes crazy. And he was concerned for me because he said, he came backstage and he said, how are you feeling? I said, fine. And he said, you think you're out of character? And I said, yes. And he asked me certain questions, being a psychologist, and I couldn't answer them. And he said, you're still there. So he showed me how.
When you first were asked to play the role of Hercule Poirot, I think you were 43 at the time. Had you had a sense of life so far as, hadn't quite made it, or were you very happy doing Shakespeare and doing what you did?
Well, I was, fortunately, I was already what we could call a successful actor. If I hadn't have had that profile, they wouldn't have come to me in the first place with Poirot. So it wasn't an overnight success. I started acting in 1968, and they came to me with the offer in 1987. So that's 21, or nearly 20 years later. So I'd already quite established.
But how did you see, in a sense, I suppose Poirot took you to new heights, if you like. Did you actually foresee that the role was going to take you there?
In no way at all. I knew nothing about the future for Poirot. I was offered 1 year, or one summer of film shooting of 10 short stories, and my agent on my behalf agreed to an option for 10 more if it was successful. And it was the hardest 6 months of my career. I'd never worked so many hours and got up so early for so many days in 6 months, but we did finish on time. And I was interviewed by several newspapers at the pre-publicity, and I remember being rapped over the knuckles by ITN at the time, no, ITV at the time, because when asked what I thought it would be like, I said, I don't know, I'm frightened it might be rather boring because he solves the cases in every single one. So I just hope it will be acceptable. I knew nothing about its future success at all. An option was taken out, and there, every time from then on, it was just contract by contract by contract. I was never commissioned on a long contract, ever. Looking back on it now, I consider myself very fortunate, because if I was asked to sign a 25-year contract playing one character, I would have turned it down, because the one thing I am is a character actor. So I had great gaps. There was one time when I had a gap of 4 years. There was another gap of 2 years. There was another gap when I thought we'd finished the series. And I was able, therefore, to take on other theatre commitments, other film commitments, and other television commitments, and as important to me at the time, radio drama as well.
So I suppose it may not have survived 25 years if you hadn't had those options to do other work.
It wouldn't have done, because I would have considered myself then totally typecast, and I would have removed myself from it. But the fact that I was continuing to do a play every 18 months or 2 years in the West End, while I was filming Poirot, at the same time as doing big Hollywood movies and different series on television as well, I just consider myself the most fortunate person, as I do now.
How did your design of the character of the Belgian detective change from the first few years to the last few years?
Well, there's something that happens naturally that no one can help, which is aging. And if you play a character over 25 years, the first thing you'll notice if you go back to the 1988 shoot
is how young he looks.
Is how young I look, even though he was supposed to be retired. But I'm a very young man there. And I only finished 2 years ago, so I'm quite an old man when I finish. So that's the main. Well, what we did develop, or the writers developed, because they saw me moving that way, because the more I read Agatha Christie, the more I was able to understand what she was writing, is the darker side of his character, and the more lonely side of his character, and also his as we moved into the big books, where he would or she would imply in her stories that he had dilemmas with his Catholic faith, for example, like in Murder on the Orient Express. How does he let so many people go when he knows them all guilty of murder? There is a moral dilemma that he faces. So all these little things. Agatha Christie would write that he looks at Hastings when Hastings is going off with a very beautiful young girl, and Poirot would look longingly and would contemplate the fact that he had never married. So there are clues in Agatha Christie which I sort of developed in a way, so that he did develop and change.
Poirot, probably like a lot of other characters you've played, wasn't completely likeable. Did you have to like the characters to perform them?
You'll hear a lot of actors say that they have to like a character. For me, it's not a question of liking a character. It's understanding a character, and understanding it not from my point of view, but understanding it from their point of view. Who am I is the great question of our lives. Who am I? And I ask that from the character's point of view, looking at their life. Who are they? Like when I played Naji Hassan in Executive Decision, when I played an Islamic terrorist. Not a likable man, but I gave him the commitment necessary from his point of view, because he believed what he was doing was absolutely right. So it's having that sort of understanding and empathy for a character rather than a liking in my case.
Can you have empathy for a character who is bad or evil?
Yes, you can, because from their point of view, they're not. And if they don't believe they're evil, then I have to look at it subjectively rather than from your statement, which would be objective.
You're currently touring Australia in the play The Last Confession. Tell me about the part you play.
I played Giovanni Bonelli, who was a dear friend of John Paul I, as we know him as the Pope, who came into the papal seat in 1978. And he died 33 days having been elected, or crowned, if you like, in the coronation ceremony as Pope. He was a darling man. He was known as the People's Pope. He was more like a parish priest. He was warm and gentle and very liberal. And there was a huge conservative right-wing element in the Vatican. And when John Paul was found dead, after only 33 days. Well, I had a friend in Rome at the time, and every single person in Rome thought he'd been poisoned. And the conspiracy theories went absolutely haywire. My character, Giovanni Bonelli, went through, in real life, a crisis of faith as well. How can God let a pope and his best friend and a pope, the direct successor to St. Peter, die after only 33 days, knowing that he was going to do so much good? So my character actually went through that crisis, and he died only 4 years later with a massive heart attack at the age of 60. And this play is as much about this journey of faith as it is about an inquiry into this very mysterious death of an extraordinary Pope, John Paul I.
Because, of course, you've had your own journey into faith.
Yes.
Were you a doubter for your life before you found God?
I was always, let me say, I had always asked questions. I was always searching for something. I never thought that what we have is just it. I thought if this is it, it's not very good. There must be more. I sort of grew up believing that. Although I came from a Jewish background, we were never brought up Jewish. And although my mother was Christian, I was never brought up Christian. I went to a Church of England school, but I never had a solid faith. So I was searching and searching and searching. And then at the age of 40, in 1986, and it's far too long a story now, but I did in fact read St. Paul's letter to the Romans. And that gave me, by the end of it, the world view that I was looking for. And then I had to question where this worldview came for St. Paul. And then I found, of course, it's Christian, and that was my movement into Christianity.
I like to go into the story a little bit because you found that section of the Bible, and there wasn't a Bible in your room at the time, while you were making one of my favourite films, which was Harry and the Hendersons.
That's quite right, yes.
And you played the...
Jacques Lafleur.
You were the Bigfoot hunter.
I was the Bigfoot hunter.
You were a baddie.
I often play baddies in movies.
And I love that film, and I can't watch it without crying.
Oh,
so
that's so sweet.
Oh, well, it was of the age. I was of the age,
yes.
rather. And I was fascinated to find out that that's when you had your...
in the hotel room.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of my grandfather, who I'd always thought of as a spiritual guide. And then I thought, I'm an adult, I'm 40 years of age. Why do I still think he's with me if I don't believe in life after death? So there was a dichotomy for me to deal with, and I decided to get out and go to a book that I knew had to do with life after death, which was the Bible. And I opened the drawer next to my bed to find it, to start reading, and it wasn't there. So then the next morning I had to try and find a Bible shop, because I was still very keen on finding out. I don't know why. Can't explain these things. So I rather furtively rang a religious bookshop. I can remember, it's almost as though I was asking for pornography. I whispered down the phone. I said, "Do you sell Bibles?" Said, "Yeah, that's what we do." So that's when I got it. And when I brought that Bible back to my room, I thought, well, I won't read it now. My room had just been made for the day. And I put it in my drawer, and there was the Bible that should have been there the night before. So I had two translations, and so I started comparing the two translations, which I love doing with text, being a classical actor. And that took me into Romans, because I knew St. Paul lived. I wasn't sure about Jesus at the time, but I knew St. Paul lived. I knew he wrote to the Romans, and I wanted to read that. And that, by the end of it, I'd found my worldview.
What was it in that whole chapter that...
Well, let me say, first of all, that so many people of the Christian faith, going right back to the early centuries, have been converted by Romans. It's an extraordinary thing, including St. Augustine. I don't know what it is about that book, but that's where I was taken anyway. And it's to do with how you relate to people. That's the worldview. And the worldview that I read was very simple. It has to do with one word, which is love, and generosity, and kindness. It had nothing to do with rules and regulations and anything like that. I would have run a mile from all that. But it had to do with love, and it had to do with people, and it had to do with how to relate in that way. And that's what converted me.
When you leave Australia, I think your next big part is going to be as Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest.
Yes.
Where did the idea of having a man playing that role come from?
Goes back, apparently, quite a long way. It goes right back into the early part of the 20th century. I haven't done my research yet, so I don't know who the first person was, the first male who actually played the role, but there has been a movement for the odd time, it's not regular, for a man to play that role.
Well, I've been doing a little bit of research for you. And
thank you.
I've got this book about Oscar Wilde, and Oscar Wilde said, "Good people are artistically uninteresting, bad people are fascinating studies and stir one's imagination." I wonder if you can have a look and see who wrote it and whether you recognise the name.
Vivian Holland.
Do you know who that was?
No, tell me.
Vivian Holland was the youngest son of Oscar Wilde, and he only reveals himself as the author in the last line.
Is that right?
And when I saw this book, I thought, books find you, for a reason.
Yes.
And the book has found you.
Well, that is such a wonderful gift. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
That is, I go home right now and read it. Thank you. This will be part of the beginning of my preparation for Lady Bracknell.
I hope it's helpful.
Thank you.
And I have 2 more questions to ask you.
All right.
You have spoken a couple of times about your obituary, and you've said that
Have I?
you have, and you've said
yes,
that
yes.
it would have a big picture of Hercule Poirot
That's what I envisage, yes.
and a small picture of you.
Yes.
Do you think often about the body of work that you will leave behind?
I don't, except that I'm told by others. You know, I forget my career. I suppose looking back on my career, my CV seems to be getting longer and longer and longer. But all I think of when I look back on my career is the variety of roles that I've played. But I've never looked on it as a huge, wonderful body of work, which I'm told. That's how I find out. I'm told it is. I'm never aware of it. I just do one job at a time, really.
Will you find that a burden, that the picture of one of your characters is larger than your picture?
No, because it sums up my whole career as a character actor. I've never wanted to be me, ever. I'm not interested in me in any way at all, even in life or as a performer. I don't really count. It's what I do and how I serve my writer in the character that I'm playing. And if he's up there, then I'd be very proud, not only for him, especially for Agatha Christie, but also for my own philosophy that he will be there. And hey, aren't I lucky to be remembered at all?
David Suchet, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for speaking with 1+1.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for this.
And that's one of my top 10. Thanks for watching. You can watch again on iView. See you next time.